with Zoom these days. Let's see. All right.
It says it's live.
Yeah. The meeting is being live streamed. Got it.
Do you have the same
No,
startup music?
I do. Just wait. Is it the same? I can't remember when we last did our show.
Okay.
Yeah, it's time.
The radical fundamental principles of freedom,
Same music.
Same music.
and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody. Welcome to the Ron Brook Show on this Thursday night, special night. We got Amy back. Amy hasn't been on the show for, I don't know, a long time. A year?
Year and a half or something, I'm thinking.
Was it pre-COVID?
I think so. Yeah, I think it was. Maybe.
All right. That's weird. I mean, this last
So much has
year-
happened.
Yes. I mean, the last year, 2020 is like a black hole. It's like, I keep thinking last time I did this, no, that was 2019, because all of 2020 is just this lumped in together with, but I'll have to check. That's bizarre if it's really been a year and a half. So Amy's back. For those of you who don't know Amy's the Chief Policy Officer of social media platform at Parler. We'll ask her in a minute what Chief Policy Officer does, what it means. Amy also has a PhD in philosophy, has a law degree, was a law professor, was a philosophy professor, was a co-host of the Yaron and Amy show, and has her own blog and had her own show for a while. And a good friend, and always good to have you on. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's been so long and so much has happened. So
Oh.
people on Twitter were talking about the fact that it's post-Trump, but to me, that wasn't the most interesting stuff necessarily, I guess.
Yeah, we'll talk about
part of
Trump. We'll disappoint everybody listening because we'll talk about Trump. People are sick of me talking about Trump after.
We don't have to talk about Trump, really. I mean,
say something about Trump. No, you don't want to talk about Trump. That's fine. That's
I mean,
too.
the thing that's relevant is, should he have been deplatformed entirely, right? That's an interesting question that would be relevant.
Yeah, we can talk about that.
Sure.
I have said publicly that I'm glad to live in a country where the president can be deplatformed and he can't do anything about it. Whether he should have is a different question, but
Right.
I'm happy that I live in a country where he can be. Okay, so let me start. So when did you start at Parler?
I started in July, right in the middle of the pandemic.
Okay, so in July of last year. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I mean, everything is like a black hole in 2020. I can't differentiate between months other than March. March left a deep trauma, but other than that, everything else is the same with me. So what is a chief policy officer?
So essentially, I help to formulate and implement policies at Parler. And because there are so many things that touch on policy, there's a lot of things that I am consulted about or have my hands in. And of course, also because we're small and essentially qualify as a startup, it's a situation where you have your hands in a lot of things anyway as well. So I'll do anything from doing some QA, checking some bugs and reporting on bugs, to actually designing and implementing a program. The policy enforcement program at Parler was actually already being implemented as they hired me. So the previous iteration of the platform, the policy enforcement, which relied upon a community jury system, was already being implemented. It was the thing that I was told that we were going to work with. What I did have a hand in right away is reforming the guidelines, actually reformulating the guidelines and publishing a new set of substantive guidelines over there. Essentially what Parler's about is allowing the maximum amount of freedom of expression consistent with the law And with respect to all legal speech, as much as possible, we could talk about the Apple app if you want to talk about that as well. But as much as possible, we believe that all legal speech should be controlled by individual users. So so-called hate speech, which many platforms will curate for you. Parler's preference whenever we, everything except for the Apple app, right, is going to be put, the tools are put into the individual user's hands. And that's our overall philosophy with respect to freedom of expression. The other thing that makes Parler unique is no data mining. You are not the commodity on Parler the way you are on competing social media platforms. So there's no tracking across apps or websites or anything else.
What's the plan? So how do you monetize?
So you can still put advertising on Parler, and we could still target within the particular platform. But what we don't do is share data outside. We don't sell data outside. Yeah.
You buy data from outside on the users? No. Nope. So it's a self-contained. So the advertising you get is in a sense is not customized.
It's customized maybe sometimes based on who you follow. Okay. So and this is how it's different.
In Parler, not your behavior outside Parler.
Exactly. And so, yeah, the tracking across apps is something that, of course, Apple's been cracking down on anyway, but that was never part of our business model, thankfully. One thing that we do, which is, I think, really nice compared to other platforms, is we allow people to target advertising to a particular person's following. So for example, Dan Bongino has a huge following on Parler. Suppose you want to place an ad only to Dan Bongino's followers. You can do that, but the thing that will happen then is Dan Bongino gets a cut.
Okay.
So on Facebook, right, your own, if I, back when I had my podcast, suppose I want to try to steal your audience, right? So I can target an ad to your followers and you don't get any money for that.
Yes, I know. Believe me, I know.
Don't you think you should?
Well, it's my choice, right? I don't have to be on Facebook, right?
No, of course you have to be on Facebook, but I'm telling you, this model.
Why would you? My question, the question is this: it's a marketplace, right? So my view is what should be is what works, and the fact is that Facebook, it works. So, you've got it. You guys have a different business model. Maybe you'll beat it, and maybe you'll make more money and maybe more successful. But it's
so. In terms of should though, let's talk about that lab leak theory, for example.
Yeah.
How about it?
Lab leak theory, what social media and what the media generally have done is horrific. But think about, none of this is new, as we know, right? Think about the Ukrainian famine, the genocide that basically happened in Ukraine in the 1930s, and the fact that the New York Times correspondent in Moscow purposefully, knowingly suppressed all information about that and actually encouraged the FDR administration to cozy up to Stalin. So, yes, media is easily corrupted by ideology, and that ideology permeates, a bad ideology permeates much of social media, and therefore it doesn't surprise me that they take a particular view with regard to certain issues.
Right, but think also about the social media having benefited tremendously from the lockdowns.
I don't buy that.
Have you seen the revenues and the extent to which the revenues went up, and the market share for these companies?
Netflix, everybody else, but to extrapolate from that they purposefully encourage lockdowns, I think is a bit much. I don't buy that.
We do know that everything COVID was heavily curated on the other leading platforms.
Everything COVID is more curated right now than it was back then, even though there are no lockdowns right now.
Not on Parler, it's not. Not on Parler, it's not. And that's my point. That's my point, Yaron. There is a need there is a
Two
need
different points,
for
right?
a platform that allows you to think for yourself and get the maximum amount of information possible.
I'm not arguing against Parler. I'm arguing.
Well, you
against-
were in the sense of you're
No,
saying Facebook works.
I'm
Well,
saying
it
the
works
business
in what
models.
sense, right?
No, I'm saying this. It's a business. It's a business, and the business models, different business models, are going to work differently. I'm not saying that people shouldn't use Parler. All I'm saying, I mean, arguing against the idea that I think there's a lot of corruption in social media. I'm arguing against the idea that they did it in order to generate revenues. Facebook was generating massive revenues before. Yes, COVID was good for them as it was for all big tech or small tech.
Well, and
or
I think
medium-sized tech. Anything that involved you staying home, COVID was good for. But to attribute therefore a motive to them, I think is conflating correlation with causation. I think is dangerous. Now, and all I was saying was that the restrictions in COVID actually now are worse than they were a year ago, and yet there's no lockdowns now. So I'm all for having alternative media and having different people express different points of view on different platforms. I'm all for Parler competing with these other platforms. It's competition. That's great. But what I resist is attributing is A, force in any form, and B, attributing to their motives that I don't think are necessarily there.
Well, so the force comes in an interesting way when you talk about our mixed economy and the posture of social media companies in particular, especially with respect to Section 230, right? And I've got a blog post. It's the last and only most recent blog post that I've written, which was back in January, right? I have no time, but at don'tletitgo.com, you can read if you want. But Section 230, if you read the writings of Clarence Thomas in Malwarebytes versus Enigma, his statement for the denial of cert talks about the fact that Section 230 is not interpreted correctly. We are in a place right now. Actually, I should back up, right? Because what does Section 230 do? Section 230 provides legal immunity to platforms with respect to user-generated content. Okay, so, and that's a correct principle. I have no problem with that principle because obviously if it's a user who produced the content and the platform did nothing but allow for it to be delivered out into the world, then why should a platform be liable for that? And it's not reasonable to hold them liable for that. That principle existed in the law before Section 230. Section 230 is not any sort of a gift or a privilege insofar as it's actually just implementing that principle. Similarly, if
courts were not upholding that principle on the internet in cases just before Section 230 was passed, it was
they were, but there was some ambiguity in the law.
I mean, there was one big case where I forget what it was. It was a
there's
investment,
a CompuServe, and then there's another case, but
investment thing where
sure, but what did 230 do? 230 just made some uniformity there, but at the same time, there is some potential contradictory language between subsections of Section 230 that Justice Thomas talks about in this statement that he made upon the denial of cert in Malwarebytes versus Enigma. You can go look it up. Reason Volokh Conspiracy Blog has a nice write-up on this. But Thomas has indicated that the immunity that's been given under Section 230 is overbroad, that the platforms are not only being given immunity for the thing that they should be given, which is that it's user-generated content, that immunity has also been granted with respect to things that the platforms do to content that are arguably editorializing or even creating part of the content that's being delivered. And exactly where you draw the line as to when just pure user-generated content is just being delivered without interference or editorializing or anything, or instead there's some action of the platform to which they should be subject for liability.
Give us an example of an action of a platform that should be subject to liability.
Those annoying COVID tags on everything related to COVID that Facebook has every single time, right?
So if there was so you would argue that if they put a tag on my video, I should be able to, well, I shouldn't be able to sue them because it's not what, who is the harmed party that should be able to sue them and for what?
Well, so it depends, right? You'd have to figure out what the harm
Let's
is.
say I put
and
up
then
a
the
video
person,
and they put up and said, hey, you should go to the CDC website to check out actual information about COVID.
sure. And if that interferes, like suppose you've seen that your traffic is reduced whenever this thing shows up on your thing, on your video, then you could sue for that. There were certain things, certain types of labeling and throttling that they did to President Trump, for example, that they showed there was a massive reduction in engagement with respect to some of these actions that they take. Some of the labels are innocuous, some not.
It strikes me that there are two different issues here. So let's see if maybe I'm wrong, but let's see if we can get clarity on the issues. So Section 230 gives them liability from being sued, for example, for libel. So if I libel you on Twitter, you can sue me, but you can't sue Twitter. Now, let's say I libel you on Twitter and Twitter puts some, what could Twitter do to that post that would make you be able to sue Twitter under this? So they would say, we agree with you on. Then obviously now they've put in some editorial comment.
Suppose Twitter, I'm going to call Twitter you. Isn't that great? So it's very bad. So because you don't want to be called Twitter by me anyway. So suppose that Twitter highlights your libel of me in some way in order to boost engagement on the platform. Something like that. Now, I mean, to what extent should they be held liable is an argument that we could have.
Yeah,
but Justice Thomas, in that statement about Malwarebytes versus Enigma, go look it up. He says that arguably the platforms are being given blanket immunity even for things in which they have a hand, and there at least needs to be an examination of this.
Sure, but I want to understand what having a hand in. Okay. It's very slippery slope there because, of course, the algorithms, the way they feed them, some things get elevated, some things do not. That's just the nature of the thing. Every single search engine in the world, every single.
And this should all be hashed out by common law judges. And so the argument is that in 230, certain ways that it's been interpreted, it could be that there's procedural things that are going to be beyond my expertise. But the point is that these actions are not being examined at all in some cases, maybe where they should be. And he argues for a narrow interpretation, a more precise interpretation that doesn't say either you're a publisher or you're a platform, that there's some things that platforms do with respect to which they become a publisher.
Treated as public utility. So I'm I become.
No, I disagree with him on that. Obviously,
I'm just saying. No, Judge Thomas has lost some of my respect.
Okay, no, but you have to read. I'll read
what he wrote.
And I agree with you entirely. They should not be called public utility.
But let me ask you one other thing. So, but that's okay. I get that. I really do suspect that nothing would change if it went to common law or if it was reasonable judges.
Well, certain things would be susceptible to discovery that are not now, for example. That would be a huge thing.
Maybe, but let's try something else. Let's try this other thing. So you said that if they cause for some reason for me to have less traffic, that I don't see what that has to do with libel. So I understand that if I post something on Twitter that where I am violating the law in some way, they're immune, you can go after me. But this idea of them suppressing traffic or increasing traffic, how is that a violation of law? I can understand that being maybe a violation of terms of service.
No. Okay, so remember the example. Remember the example, Yaron. The example is the libel. So if what they've done is given a bigger, excuse me. Yeah. If this is exactly what I had in mind when I argued this to you. If what they're doing is increasing the circulation and the damage done by the libel, that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about.
So Trump says something stupid and Twitter says this is stupid, and his numbers drop, but wasn't liable. He didn't break the law. They didn't break the law. They just said this is our opinion about it. Why would that make them? Why would that be? Why would they have violated why would it? What the relevance of 230 to that?
Okay, so the labels would have two different things. So the label itself, if they could be potentially held liable for the opinion expressed by the label.
And they can today? Are we sure they can today?
He's saying that the way that Section 230
No,
is interpreted,
we can't sue them for something they express?
you can try, but what Thomas is saying is that the way Section 230 is interpreted is that it's too hard to hold the platforms accountable for this type of behavior, because courts aren't clear about saying that, look, there's some things in which they are partially responsible for the content of what's being put out there, right? They are acting partially as publishers. They're contributing to the content that's being seen in a way.
But do we know that? So let's say they have a post on COVID that's I think is true, and they put some label about go to CDC, and it reduces my viewership. Let's say they didn't just say go to CDC. Let's say we think Yaron's post is full of it, right? We think it's false, right? If I sued
which they do to a lot of people all the time. Sure. Yeah.
Has anybody sued them? Has anybody tried that? Do we know
people,
that the court would treat it in a particular way on that issue? Because it worries me that because if they write the CDC, yes, it's going to reduce my traffic, but I don't see how I could sue them. They haven't lied.
People who have talked about the procedural difficulties with respect to these cases have said that it is extremely difficult to sue. And so Thomas's only argument is that you should have a narrower interpretation of Section 230, that right now the immunity, while correct in principle, is being applied in a way that is overbroad. And he indicates specific subsections that seem to be sort of at war, and he indicates a path for interpreting it more narrowly. My point in bringing this up is that I think he's probably right, and that this is really the way to cure the problems with Section 230. But the problem is today's context, right? Well, what do we have today instead? We have politicians who are pretending that Section 230 is some gift that they are bestowing upon the social media companies, big tech, whatever, right? Sure. And at the same time, they are pressuring the social media companies to do the very actions for which they are granted immunity in the very ways that they, the politicians, want them to do. So, for example, they want more hate speech, so-called hate speech, which is a very problematic term. On Parler, we talk about trolling. We talk about attacks on the basis of characteristics such as race and sex and blah, blah, blah. I reject that term in the policy as we talk about it.
So what's the problem with hate? Because I agree with you. It's a terrible term. What's the problem with hate?
Well, I mean, the problem is that with the exception of there's a subset of hate speech, which is actually just really incitement or some actually illegal speech, right? That's threats, incitement to violence, et cetera. With the exception of that, the rest of hate speech is legal speech. And it is speech that government should not have any hand in having throttled, removed, whatever. But instead today we have the politicians calling Dorsey and Zuckerberg and Pindar, these people before them, and I call them haranguings. They're hearings, but they're haranguings at the same, right? Sure. And they are telling them essentially, we want you to exercise your Section 230 immunity the way we want you to do it, and if you don't, we're going to maybe get rid of it altogether, but probably we want to amend it in certain ways. We want to make this immunity conditional upon you doing certain things the way we want. And you have Zuckerberg there, even himself suggesting that they amend it in various ways, requiring that they have transparency about the way that they handle certain content, and also maybe even accountability to handle certain content the way that, as effectively as Facebook does, which if you've read, the news in the last few months, we were taken down. Parler was deplatformed, And then the news stories came out that said, oh, gee, this content was all over Facebook
All on
too.
Facebook. Yep.
Yeah.
So, so a few things about hate speech. I mean, one of the dangers about it is that in Europe, for example, there are laws against it. So while it's protected speech in the US, it certainly is not protected speech in Europe. And there's no question there are people who would like it to be.
Zuckerberg has said he has basically invited Congress to regulate hate speech. And the perfect vehicle for it would be for them to amend Section 230 in a way that requires them to remove this speech and and it's just a condition of the immunity, and it's, no big deal, but actually that is censorship. And to me, when I see, I've always resisted using the term censorship for the actions of social media companies.
Yep.
But when you combine this immunity, which is arguably overbroad, and you have these politicians telling them to exercise, to take the actions for which they are immune in ways that throttle legal speech. We're in this mixed economy. When do you call that censorship, Yaron? So I'm open to calling that censorship.
When they become public utilities, as Thomas would like, because before then, what you risk is then attributing every kind of government pressure on a private business, and attributing the evil and the damage that they're doing to the private business. I say,
everywhere. Right.
The government is in the business of every single business. My speech is limited. My speech is limited dramatically by the government. The government censors me.
I mean, clearly. Let's start talking about hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin and see how quickly YouTube will take it down, right?
Yes, but that is not because of the government. That is because of terrible choices. I don't believe that's because of government. I do believe that's because of terrible choices YouTube and others are making. I don't think the government has an incentive around what's it called, ivermectin or whatever it's called.
Ivermectin,
ivermectin, or the other one, which is I can't pronounce either. But I don't think it's
the government. Fauci who had the hand in saying that vaccines were the way, and I mean, I don't think that there would have been.
But look, everybody says this is, and again, this feeds into a very dangerous dialogue, right? Pharmaceutical companies don't want these other drugs out there because they can't make money off of them. So they put pressure on the government to ban them, and the government then pushes. This is very dangerous because there's no evidence to suggest that the one treatment that is helpful to COVID patients in ICUs is a treatment where the pharmaceutical companies basically get no money for. I forget the name of it. It's a steroid. It's zero cost or very little cost, right? And yet there's no objection to that because it's been shown scientifically to work. So I think YouTube and so on are wrong to do what they do from a business perspective, from a just informational perspective. But I think it's very dangerous to start attributing that backwards to the government, to Fauci, or to certainly to pharmaceutical companies. I don't see the evidence for that. I know that there are
misinformation. Misinformation is used as a term constantly in all of these hearings. Conspiracy theories and misinformation.
Yes, but hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, there's a lot of misinformation on both sides, on the sides promoting it as well.
Okay, but my point is that government shouldn't be telling platforms what they need to be doing about this.
I agree, but I don't think it's government. I think it's the platforms doing it for their own stupid reasons. So the platforms have a bad ideology. I think one has to separate the bad ideology that the platforms have from the pressure they might or might not be getting.
What about when the platform's bad ideology just dovetails right into what the government is trying to do? I mean, I've got, again, the cover image on that blog post is an actual screenshot of an ad from New York Times. Facebook was taking out ads in New York.
Whoops, you froze. It's not me.
In January, calling. Oh, did I? Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, Facebook was taking ads in the New York Times. Go back to that.
In the New York Times, yes, this is back in January, and calling for updated internet regulations.
But we know that, but businesses does that all the time. And indeed, many libertarians make this point that businesses capture the regulators. And this is a business strategy that basically says if the government's going to regulate you, and they're going to, we know they're going to, whether it's Republicans or Democrats, they're going to regulate big tech, get in front of the curve and propose the regulations that benefit you at the expense of others. Now, I'm not a fan of that, obviously. I'm against it, but I can completely understand why
it is.
And again,
particularly dangerous with social media.
I agree, but
it is particularly dangerous.
The blame should be placed on the people, on the people initiating the regulations, which is on the politicians, right? Who constantly are berating.
Sure, they're pointing the gun at these guys, right?
And these guys
they're the ones.
If you're going to point the gun at me, then here's a proposal. At least if we're going to do something, let it be something more favorable to me than the alternative. Right?
Sure.
I don't blame them for doing that.
And Zuckerberg's, he's bragged about how great they are at, filtering out hate speech, which of course I've seen the effectiveness of these filters now firsthand, right now that we've brought some automation into Parler as well. But, again, think about what these social media companies are. They're unique in the sense of they are both disseminators of crucial information, and they also collect, some of them more than others, tons of information about their users. And when you start encouraging more and more regulation, you have basically government blended with these in a way that you're inviting Big Brother. I mean, you really are creating Big Brother. We have, in addition, how did I get to Parler, right? The way I got to Parler was because I wrote a brief in United States versus Facebook. That was the case of the consent decree, right? Back in 2020. That was one of the things that happened in 2020 is we had a federal judge go ahead and put his rubber stamp on this consent decree, which, if you read it, arguably gives the FTC and the DOJ warrantless access to Facebook user data. And to the extent that an amended Section 230 is going to require certain types of effectiveness with respect to hate speech and et cetera, all these businesses like Facebook, et cetera, are going to be collecting information about how effective they are in regulating whatever type of speech it is. And all of that data is going to be subject to inspection by federal government without a warrant. You can be brought up for wrongthink and investigated for wrongthink because of these regulations. This is censorship.
It's truly scary. That is censorship.
They are asking for censorship.
Well, but they don't have a choice.
I don't care if they don't have a choice. I'd say they're asking for censorship, and censorship is bad.
Yes. They're asking for censorship. Yes. Censorship is bad.
Parler is fighting it.
And you could argue that the consent decree was already censorship, right? That the consent decree was already censorship. So
that was why I wrote the brief, right?
Yes, and I would argue that Facebook is the victim of censorship, and it's the sanction of the victim when they support because of the consent decree, right? They were victims of censorship, just like the consent decree that Microsoft signed was.
I see them more like there was the abusive parent. And then there's the kid of the abusive parent who then abuses his own kids. Yeah. That's how I see it. Maybe it's a little late.
And of course,
but I mean,
we're the ones either way who are going to be the most abused, because you're right. I mean, and this is more than anything why I oppose changing Section 230, right? Not because I necessarily disagree with you about the subtleties of it, or with Thomas about the subtleties that they could be, that it should be.
No, and Thomas is not advocating amending Section 230 in any way. He's saying you can interpret it better. Yes, let's have the common law sort this out.
That would be great. I think that's absolutely right, and we should see that. And it surprises me that it's not happening, given the diversity of judges that we have, that somebody isn't taking it up some way and actually litigating it. But here's the problem. Is once you raise those issues, once Section 230 is okay, it's flawed, or it's disastrously flawed, as some people say. Now government feels like, now that politicians feel like they've been emboldened to go in and tinker with it. And even if we could improve it, and maybe we could improve it, right? Maybe we could write it better, because the guys who wrote it in 1986, I think generally had good intentions.
Sure.
But, it was 1996. What did they know, right? And today maybe we could improve it and make it better. Given the politicians we have on left and right, the chances that we get a better product at the end.
No, exactly. And that is why there are people who have argued that in today's context, and I agree that in today's context, it might be the case that we would be better off with a repeal. That sounds terrible, right? But what would happen then? You'd have the common law have to sort this out, and it might take a while, and it might be messy, and it might be expensive, but then you would not have politicians amending Section 230 and pushing us towards Orwell's 1984, which is, I think, what's coming if and when they amend Section 230, which is likely.
I agree with you completely.
Yeah.
I agree with you completely. If they amend it, it's a disaster. If Zuckerberg's proposals accepted, it's a disaster. All of these things are disasters. I suspect that if you did away with Section 230, if you repealed it, which I think, again, is off the cards, it's not going to happen because politicians are not going to allow it.
No, I mean, it might have happened for a brief moment under Trump for the wrong reasons, maybe, in my view.
No,
right?
because he wanted to amend it again for his own reasons and for his own purposes.
At a certain point, he did want to repeal it, though. He was putting it on a defense bill or something, right? Which you and I would have criticized all day long. We would have had a great time criticizing that.
Every 5 minutes he changed his mind. So who knows? But certainly Ted Cruz doesn't want to repeal 230. He wants to use 230 for his own means.
I've hated some of the things Cruz has said about 230. I think you and I are generally on the same page. But I think where we're disagreeing is that I think it's not bad at all to start talking about this stuff as censorship in the context of the mixed economy. It doesn't force you to call every single thing. It lets you see that everything today is such a mess, and there is, this real pressure coming from the politicians to have them exercise the powers that they have, for which they have immunity, in exactly the ways the politicians want them to do their bidding. And that's what you're hearing in all these hearings. And sure. In many cases, the philosophies of the people in, these tech companies are aligned with them too. So it is a mess. And the thing that is likely coming is this Orwellian. So here's Parler, and we were taken down. We were scapegoated as somehow contributing to an insurrection. I think you've seen the news that's come out since then. Sure. Not only was the content on all these other platforms too, platforms with tons of resources and supposedly so good. And that's the other thing. So Parler was, forwarding content to the FBI in the weeks leading up to the 6th, and that's also come out in the weeks since. We were unjustly platformed. We think that a lot of the reason is because we pose a threat to the business model of these other platforms. We are the only ones out there. Well, okay, so maybe there's a smaller competitor or two, but of the viable platforms, I mean, we really were taking on millions of new users in that week leading up to the deplatforming. And we're the ones who say that we want you to think for yourself. We want you to curate your own feed to the extent that the content is legal. We want the decisions to be put into your hands. Other platforms, they are doing your thinking for you or trying to do your thinking for you. They are deciding what is hate speech and what is not. They are data mining. They are treating their users as commodities. And so, we pose a threat to that model entirely.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, but I'm not quite as quick to demean their business model, given that it's been so successful. And users, if you're going to blame anybody, blame the users, because people.
Jerry Springer had great ratings for a long time. But go ahead.
And I'm, and I wouldn't, the business model worked, right? I wouldn't condemn. I mean, the fact is, users don't care. For better, for worse, users don't care about the use of private information.
Well, it's for worse. It's for worse, right?
Well, maybe. I mean, I wouldn't care, except I don't care for the most part, except for the possibility you raised, which is that when the government gets their claws deeper into these companies, they will take. So the consent decree is why I care, but I don't care. I don't mind the fact that Facebook knows what Google searches I do, and it feeds me information about stuff that I looked on Google, because I might discover stuff that I didn't before. So I don't care about stuff like that. What I do care is the government seeing it. I don't have a problem with Facebook's business model. I have a problem with Facebook, and I don't have a problem with Facebook deciding.
Well, as a creator, for example, right? Because you have this show and everything else. Wouldn't you prefer, for example, if I am targeting your following on Facebook, that you at least get a cut of that?
Yeah, but I prefer a lot of things. But
Sure.
and I prefer a lot of things. So yeah, I mean, that would be nice. I'd like to be able to sell advertising on my page on Facebook.
That happens on Parler.
Yeah, but it's their page. I can't do it. They have the audience. So I'm fine with it. It doesn't offend me. I prefer it, but it doesn't offend me that they're making money off of my followers that I'm not involved in.
I'm not saying you have to be offended. I'm just saying that we are posing a different type of model out there.
You're trying to market Paula, and no, it's
no, but I'm explaining why maybe
business model without condemning the alternative business model. I think you have a business model, and that for creators probably makes more sense once you gain enough audience to attract. And Facebook has a business model, and the marketplace will sort it out in terms of which model. I agree completely that to the extent that somebody like Facebook uses government to oppress you, that's wrong. I mean, obviously, we agree on that. But YouTube sells advertising for me. I mean, that's pretty cool, right? It would cost me a lot of money to go out and get my own advertising YouTube. And once in a while, they won't let me monetize it on stuff that I don't expect, right? So I've talked about COVID. I've been anti-lockdowns, more anti-lockdowns than most people. They never demonetized the video of me anti-lockdowns. But when I talk about sex, or when I talk about Jeffrey Epstein, of course, I'm against Jeffrey Epstein, just to be clear, right?
Sure.
Right. They wouldn't monetize that, right? They won't monetize my abortion stuff, even though I'm on their side on abortion, right? When I do something on abortion, they won't monetize it, even though I'm pro-choice, and they were pro-choice, obviously. So their standards for what they monetize or not are completely different than what you'd expect, than what, let's say, the more politicized, bigger names are experiencing. I'm not experiencing that at all. So I haven't had a demonetized video in a year, in months, not in a year, in months. And again, all of them, the ones that have been about topics that, so I'm still grateful to places like Facebook. I don't have anywhere else on planet Earth where I have, 40,000 followers. It's the only place I have 40,000 followers. I'm certainly grateful for YouTube. YouTube is an amazing platform. It's flawed. I'd like to see them better. My main concern, we've talked about this in the past, is I'd love to see.
You dropped out there for me. You're still frozen. Okay, you're frozen. You're frozen for me. So okay. you said you'd like to see, and then I didn't hear what you were.
I think we've agreed on this because we've talked about this in plan. What I'd like to see is objective terms of service. So I can read them and say, if the terms of service actually said, you can't talk about alternative treatments to COVID. I say, okay, I know. Okay, now I know. I might choose to go off YouTube if that was a term of service, but I know what the term of service is, fine. But the term of service, my problem with YouTube and Facebook and Twitter is that the terms of service are vague. They're non-objective. And that makes it impossible to know in advance what will be penalized and what will not be penalized. That's my main concern.
I mean, objectionable speech versus actually talking about it concretely in terms of attacks on the basis of race and sex and religion and sexual orientation. At least then we could be objective about what it is that is going to be treated in various ways.
Absolutely. Just say we're not going to monetize abortion videos. Fine. I mean, I get it. You don't want to sell advertising for videos that have some sensitivity to some of your audience. I don't have a problem with that, but be clear, because right now I can't figure it out. It's not.
And again, this issue of being allowed and encouraged to think for yourself versus have a platform do your thinking and sorting and fact checking for you, I think is an important issue. And it's more than just money, and it's more than just, oh, let the market decide. There's a normative issue here. The fact that Facebook can have the biggest market share while it fact checks everything in the world doesn't make it good. Obviously, we know this.
No, but but is it really that bad? That is, I mean, every media that we've ever had has had an element of fact checking. We haven't ever experienced anything that hasn't been fact checked to some extent, hasn't been filtered and siphoned. So I don't get offended by the fact that they're putting those stupid CDC. What I get offended is when they take the videos off. When Brett
okay, so when you have, for example, an evening news broadcast, of course that's supposed to be fact checked, and it's brought to you by journalists who are supposed to have done this. In fact, when they haven't done it properly, it's a big scandal, right? That they're delivering you false news that hasn't been properly vetted. When we have a platform, and the platform is just supposed to be user-generated content, and what makes these guys experts on what is true and what is not on everything under the sun that people are going to post about on social media? Again, how about that lab leak theory, Yaron? How about it?
Well, again,
I mean, we've got a theory that explains where this pandemic came from. This pandemic that killed millions of people.
Yes, and the New York Times repressed it, and the Washington Post repressed it, and everybody pretty much repressed it.
Still that's a but Hillary argument, but yeah.
No, my point is that if you didn't have social media, the lab leak theory would have gotten exactly to the same place it goes today. So they're behaving in very similar.
Social media should be better. It's supposed to just be a platform.
I don't know that it's supposed to be better. I think it would be ridiculous to assume that it's better. Right. I don't think it is going to be better. I don't think there's a way for it to be better. It's not going to be better than the culture, and the culture is what drives these things.
Okay, but my point is, how is the culture going to improve unless people have the freedom to make the choice to improve?
I mean, but people have to choose to have that freedom, and people are not choosing to have that freedom.
So choose to have that freedom, come to Parler, support somebody who's actually choosing that to give you the ability to think for yourself and curate your own feed.
Sure, but part of the argument was, and I don't want to get into a big discussion but part of the argument was that pre the banning of Parler, people weren't going to Parler for the freedom of expression, but people were going to Parler for a particular ideology, to be inside their own bubble, right?
Some people were
in a right-wing bubble. Sure. So I'm not sure. I don't think Parler solves the problem. I think the problem is us, not us, but the problem is out there. The problem is the people. The problem is education. The problem is the way people think about the world. We get the institutions in a sense we deserve. And I think people's acceptance of what Facebook does, acceptance of the lockdowns, acceptance of all these things, a consequence of the culture in which we live. And I hope people approach Parler from the perspective of freedom of expression. And go there in order to.
I agree that some haven't. So, for example, we would have people report content on Parler because it was anti-Trump.
Yeah.
So someone would say, and of course we trained all the jurors to ignore these things because we are viewpoint neutral. We always have been viewpoint neutral. But Yaron, it is very natural that conservatives came over to Parler. Sure. In droves, even though we are viewpoint neutral, they would be the first early adopters. Why? Because they often were treated unfairly on the other platforms. Sure. Their viewpoint was not welcome there. So, you don't, talk about a platform as having the identity necessarily of the early adopters. Again, we are viewpoint neutral. We always have been. Is anybody perfect? No, but we are better and better at administering the guidelines enforcement in a viewpoint neutral way all the time. We're working with a company now that will equally, deem as they call it hate speech, right? I call it trolling, and I told you what it's about. But the sorts of smears and slurs that are used by typically left-wing people versus right-wing people equally are going to be flagged, by these algorithms, and that's what we strive for.
I mean, I think that's great. I think that's great that there is that option, and I wish the other platforms again either had better terms of service or had less of a political agenda, and usually a non-explicit political agenda. It would be even better if they just said, again, make your political agenda explicit. We all know what it is, and then we can adapt. But of course, the New York Times never did that. Pretended to be neutral, and nobody does that. Fox News says balanced view, both sides. So it's very unusual to have a place where actually treats political views that the people involved in managing don't agree with.
That's why I feel fortunate to have found where I am, right? I didn't know what I was doing when I was writing that brief, but then it was read by one of the strategic investors, and that's how I got there. So, yeah. All
right. So let's do some super chat questions. We've got a few. We've got a few that are $20 and more. So we'll start with those. Remind everybody, our goal in these are always to get a $400, right? Alejandrina is here. I think she's here. Yeah, she's definitely here. Ali's here to make sure you guys get to $400. So we're a little short. I don't know what's going on lately. You guys are, in honor of Amy being here, you should all be writing a juicy, big, super chat questions. Oh, wait, we got a $50 question. Inflicting someone with a deadly disease and initiation of force. Making oneself more infectious, for example, by not vaccinating or fake drugs, increases other risks of death. Isn't prohibiting this legislation legitimate function of objective government? Prohibiting this a legitimate function of objective government? No, it's not a legitimate function of. So, first of all,
I mean, what if you were talking about Ebola? Would your answer be different? Because he's probably talking about COVID, but
no, it wouldn't.
No? Okay.
In the sense, you can stay at home. So yes, if you have Ebola, if you know you have Ebola, or if you have not taken any precautions against Ebola, and you go onto the street and party with people, yeah, you should be put in jail. But the government shouldn't mandate that you be vaccinated. They should punish you if you. I said this early on with the COVID. If you get on, and this is before we knew that airplanes are fairly safe, but if you know you have COVID and you get on a plane, knowing you have COVID, this is before masks and planes and everything, then yeah, you should be liable. You've just caused harm. You put other people at risk, and just like if you're drunk and driving, right? You don't prohibit drinking, but you prohibit drinking and driving. You don't prohibit not getting the vaccine, but you prohibit, if you're not vaccinated and you've got the disease, going out into the public and spreading it. So it's the action, and there is a question of knowledge. So there's some subtlety in the law, I'm sure, of what you knew and what you should have known or what you could have known. What precautions did you take? All of those would be taken into account. But I don't think I don't think you can. I mean, I don't know if you disagree. I don't think you can mandate a vaccine.
No, I mean, you could say in very crazy circumstances like in Ebola or something, maybe, right? But
in a small area where it was already spreading and you can control it and you couldn't monitor anything. Yeah, I mean, just like lockdowns. I always said lockdowns are okay in a limited geographic area for a limited period of time, clear and present danger, and clear objective standards for when the danger's over and the lockdown's finished. You can't have indefinite lockdowns. That's so unconstitutional. I can't believe. Do you have any opinion on how the courts allowed? I mean, one court in Pennsylvania ruled lockdowns unconstitutional. I don't know where that court case went after that. I don't know if you.
It is insane, and the lockdowns have increased the power of
Believe-
all of these tech companies over our lives, including Amazon, which deplatformed us in January. Go on.
Much more importantly, it's increased the power of government dramatically, and the fact that people didn't stand up to it means that government knows it can get away with it. And globally, it's not even the United States; it's globally. So
yeah, and combine all of us being at the mercy of tech to communicate with each other with the third-party doctrine.
not the right way to look at it, Amy. Really, it really isn't. You're
No,
not
no.
at the mercy of tech to communicate with one another.
In a lockdown, you are.
God, you
in a
have
lockdown.
Tech. Thank God you have tech. Not thank God.
Okay. But my point is
company.
that you and I couldn't go meet at a coffee shop. We could only speak over Zoom.
Sure.
And at the same time, the third-party doctrine would give the government access to that.
Would the third-party doctrines? We completely agree is completely evil. And
right. So, but you combine
those.
you combine the lockdowns with that. Government had access to everything.
But let's not take technology for granted. Let's again.
No, by itself, it's fine. I'm talking about the third-party doctrine.
Yeah, but I'd still rather have the tech and the third-party doctrine than no tech. And now I don't think there would have been lockdowns without tech. I think there would have been riots.
Sure.
I think there would have been demonstrations.
Sure.
I think American people wouldn't have stood. I think the tech, in a sense, softened us and made us soft to the lockdowns, which is
exactly
negative impact. But
exactly, because this is very addictive.
What is coffee?
This.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you believe Amazon would advocate for lockdown since it benefits from relative? This is early on when you said that. Do you think Amazon advocated for lockdown since it benefited from the relative small time mom and pop stores?
WAPO. Yeah.
What's that?
Amazon owns WAPO, or Bezos did. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think Amazon advocated for lockdowns or wanted lockdowns. I don't think that I don't think the Washington Post advocated for lockdowns because it was owned by Jeff Bezos. Every newspaper in the country advocated for lockdowns, even though they were not owned by Jeff Bezos. So I don't think you could show that relationship.
Okay.
Between business advocacy and for lockdowns and the profits they made.
They definitely had a conflict of interest, though, because it was really inflating and it still has the bottom line of these big companies: Facebook, Google, Amazon.
I look at it completely different. I look at it the other way around. I say, they provided us an amazing value given that we had lockdowns. They didn't.
Given that we had lockdowns, sure.
They didn't cause the lockdowns. Our governments caused the lockdowns. Given that we had the lockdowns, they made our life 1,000 times better. Good for them for making a lot of money doing it.
And to the extent that all of the politicians were pressuring them to curb misinformation about COVID, but they were happy to comply because they also have their bottom line being inflated.
It wasn't misinformation that caused the lockdowns. The lockdowns were caused way before anybody was accused of any.
No, but the misinformation will.
Misinformation is bad, and
we could put it in square.
Yeah, and I'm not sure
all day
because I'm not sure that
certain information getting out would make people less compliant with lockdowns, and that is something that governments did not want to see happen. It's interesting that we don't know what happened to that case in Pennsylvania, right?
No, it's an appeal. It's on appeal. It's okay. Somewhere. Yeah, I followed it, but I just don't know if there's anything new. But it's in the process. But a court did rule that, and then it was appealed by the state, and it's in a district court somewhere. These things take for years. By the time you need action, the lawsuit is gone. My point is, lockdowns had nothing to do with misinformation. The persistence of lockdowns had nothing to do with bad information. It had everything to do with government power hungry. The data about the evil of lockdowns was out there. I put it out there. I was not demonetized, or my videos were not taken off when I advocated against lockdowns.
Some people were.
Very few were because of that. Very few people were because of that specific things. So, and the idea that Washington Post,
not what I've heard,
the bidding of the government, I think is wrong, or the bidding of Amazon, I think is wrong, when every other newspaper did the same thing. it's, yeah, I don't buy it.
I don't think Wall Street Journal did, but okay.
Wall Street Journal editorial page didn't, but the front page certainly did. If you look at the reporting in the Wall Street Journal about COVID, it was pro lockdowns. If you look at the editorial page, it was anti-lockdowns. But what difference does that make? The reporters all were pro. Just like in the old days, we didn't have to come up with some pressure. It's not the case that Goldman Sachs pressured the Wall Street Journal to go after Michael Milken. But they did anyway, right? Even though the editorial page was pro Michael Milken, the front page wasn't, because the front page is leftist and the editorial page tends to be conservative, sometimes libertarian. But a lot of big businesses suffered dramatically, that have a lot of influence in Washington, suffered dramatically from lockdowns. Couldn't do anything about it, because once those politicians get their power lusting.
Yeah, but somehow the ones in the control of our information did so well. Interesting.
Well, but they did so well because they provided us with a life in spite of the fact that we were in lockdowns. That's why they did so well. It's the causality is the reverse. Lockdowns happened because of politicians, and luckily there were companies there that provided us with entertainment while that was going on, and good for them. And that's why they made a lot of money. It wasn't that they saw the lockdowns and they said, cool, we can make a lot of money. Let's put pressure on politicians to have more lockdowns. It's not the causal relationship.
I don't think they put pressure on the politicians, but again, they were happy to go along with what the politicians wanted anyway.
There's no evidence of that. They were happy to go along with certain ideas about COVID that didn't necessarily have anything to do with lockdowns. I don't think there's any evidence that they were happy with lockdowns. They made money. That doesn't mean they were happy with them. And again, there is also the philosophical ideology within these companies. I mean, I know young people who work at tech companies, not even the big ones, but just tech companies, who won't leave their homes. Who barely left their homes during COVID. They were terrified. Wore, double masked, all the bullshit, and considered going to a restaurant and mall. That wasn't because they were trying to make money. That was because they have a crazy, sick, snowflake ideology that these Gen Xers have, unfortunately. And it didn't take much misinformation to get that way. They were that way pretty early on.
Sure. And so this highlights, at the very least, the normative necessity to have open flow of information to try to at least assuage some of that. Mm-hmm.
If people are open to it and people are willing to think about it. I mean, I think it goes back to what extent are people open to better ideas? And that's where we struggle, right? Because even if you have the free flow of information, if people are not open to better ideas because they've been so conditioned by the educational system.
Sure, but you have to have the openness and the ideas flowing first before people can even decide whether they're open. An
argument to you that I've made to pretty much everybody else, right? And I've been making this for years and years and years. We live at a time in history where there's more flow of information than ever before. So you can access everything today. And if you're curious, you can find alternative points of view. I go back to the 1970s, right? No talk radio, no right-wing talk radio. There was radio with news and stuff. 3 networks, 4 with PBS, all left-wing, all of them left-wing. All major newspapers, left-wing. Maybe the Wall Street Journal was, Ayn Rand considered them left-wing, but they were, let's say, better, right? But that's it, one newspaper. Maybe the Orange County Register, maybe a couple, but right, all the newspapers. If you wanted alternative information in the 1970s, where did you get it? It didn't exist. You couldn't find it. Today, if you're curious, you can find Parler. You can for now. You can go to your own book show. You can find Amy Peikoff's blog. You can find Alex Jones. It might not be easy to find Alex Jones, but he's out there. These tech companies have given us a voice that we didn't have, and that's a reality.
And now some of us are having to struggle and rebuild entire stacks because we were completely deplatformed on specious grounds.
Yeah,
back in January, and that can happen to anybody in this
and you guys are
environment.
suing the company that did that to you, and we'll see what happens. But the danger today does not, in my view, come from big tech. It comes from government and its interaction with big tech. But it's always government interaction with anything is the danger. But the fact is, the reality is that we have never in all of human history had more access to more varied information from more varied sources than we do.
And
right
let's keep it that way. Let's keep it that way. And what is necessary to keep it that way?
Keep
I think
government
what
Section 230.
Yes, keep government out of it. So well, we agree there. And not just keep government out of it, but also vote, so to speak. I know some people don't like using that term in the market, but actually go and use those services that are explicitly and in practice in favor of keeping open information.
But only if it's a value to you, right? So when I looked at Parler late last year, right, it wasn't a value to me because there was too many of the voices there were just pro-Trump, monotone, and there was nothing for me as a content creator, as I thought at the time, to do there because it was uninteresting. As the platform becomes more interesting in a sense of more varied, more objective, then I think, so there are two elements. One is support those platforms that advocate for greater expression. Second, it has to be a value to you, right, as an individual.
Sure, and so, for instance, you moved from California, which maybe there's some things that you miss about California. Yeah, there's a few I miss as well, right? But you went to Puerto Rico and I went to Texas.
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. So people move.
There's an analogy for you.
It took me a long time to leave California because the values that California presented are huge. And Puerto Rico is pretty cool. If Puerto Rico sucked, I wouldn't move to Puerto Rico. And Texas is pretty cool. I lived there for a long time, and
Austin area in particular,
I love Austin. So it's pretty cool. So but there has to be a positive value in addition to escaping a negative. It has to be both, right?
Yes.
All right, we got a ton of questions, so let's do this. If Facebook doesn't want its property used to spread dangerous advice, such as posts encouraging people to eat Tide Pods, whose rights are violated when they use algorithms to display warnings about risks on their own site?
Whose rights are, if they say that they don't want to have the Tide Pod thing? No, no one's rights are being violated if they're doing that just by themselves. And my only point is that today there is a blurred line between what they're doing only because they want to, or because they are in this symbiotic relationship with certain politicians.
So the bloodline is very scary, and I agree. And I have said this about cronyism, about all types of cronyism. Our focus should be, in my view, our single-minded focus should be on blaming and going after politicians in that regard. And the
cronies who sanction that. Yeah.
The obvious ones, yes. But the only reason the cronies exist is because the politicians have the power and use that power to encourage them. So that's somebody says, come back to us in Iran. No way. Just bought a home in Puerto Rico. This is where I'm going to be for a while. But I'll be visiting Austin a lot, I think for a variety of reasons. Lots of my friends in Austin, and some programs at the UT that are interesting. There's a lot of stuff going on in Austin that is probably going to be a magnet for me. If you constantly see yourself a victim, all right, let's find ones that are more relevant. No, that's not relevant. I'm not sure you want to answer this. Well, I'll answer it so that you don't have to. Any updates on future graphic novels of Atlas Shrugged? No, I think that's right. So that the project fell through a couple of years ago. Thoughts on reading Atlas Shrugged as a bedtime story to children? I'm against.
Me too.
Yeah.
Weird. Yeah. No. Okay. I don't want to say it that way. I mean, let me explain why it's weird.
Say why.
Atlas Shrugged is something that I agree with Aristotle. Aristotle used to say in Nicomachean Ethics that before you could be a proper student of ethics, you had to have a certain amount of life experience before you could really even understand the teachings. There is so much at such a high level in Atlas Shrugged that it is not age appropriate for children. What would you say would be the appropriate age to read Atlas Shrugged for the first time, Yaron?
Well,
I guess it's hard to say. I mean, it depends on the child, but.
I read it at 16.
Okay.
There are probably some really, really bright kids that could probably read it at 14, but that's unusual. I'd say for most people out there, for most Americans, because I think Americans mature late.
And yeah, it's not just a matter of being bright. It's also a matter of being
Really?
Emotionally mature and having a certain amount of life experience with respect to relationships.
Yeah.
And we don't want kids having to think of politics before a certain age, and yet everything's politicized for kindergartnens these days. It's too much too soon.
Atlas deals with politics, with economics, with the philosophy,
sex,
all topics that children have no context for. I mean, take philosophy. Children don't know and can't know what these philosophical ideas are. And to the extent that they mouth them back to you, they don't have, this is where experience is so crucial that Amy was talking about. I mean, we're not talking about experience necessarily. I mean, relationship is important, but it's how do you know anything about philosophy without knowing about the world, about a little bit about history, some about relationships, some about, maybe the experience of lying and what it does, about, some moral kind of experiences of what works and what doesn't, what benefits your life and what doesn't. Otherwise it's just a floating abstraction. It's very rationalistic. Even at 16, even though I completely changed my life because of Atlas, I was a rationalist. It was a floating abstraction for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say for most Americans, I'd say 18 to 22. When did you read it, Amy?
It was probably 19 to 20, something like that. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a sweet spot.
Mm-hmm.
Why would a social media platform want to make its detailed objective policies part of the terms of service? They would need every user to re-opt in every time they adjust for a new borderline issue. So I don't think you'd have to have borderline issues. So I agree. I didn't really mean they should state, these are the issues. Although it would be nice for the content producers if when they came up with something new, they say, hey, by the way, content producers, we're not going to monetize videos on abortion, right? That would be nice if I got.
Yeah, if you have a concrete like that, then it would be nice to be upfront about it, right?
You could make generalizations. I mean, you could make
and moreover, in a terms of service, it will say that these terms of service are subject to change, and your continued use of the platform says that you agree. Now, I would say ethically, if you're going to have a major change in terms of service, it would be good to put a little dialogue box in front of somebody and say, hey, there's been this major change, go back and agree again. But typically you'll put as a standard statement in terms of service that these are subject to change, and that your continued use of the platform means that you're going to.
Yeah, so there are lots of ways in which they could do that. If you read the terms of service right now, and look, part of the problem, I think, and I'm curious what you think, Amy, is that we've over legalized, that's probably not the right term, the world in which we live. So when you go and sign a mortgage, the documents are like this thing. Nobody reads these really, really important contracts where you're putting down you're committing yourself to I never read my mortgage, even though it was massive mortgage. And I signed and I walk away and I don't even read them because you can't. And the same with terms of service. And like every time you get a pop-up on a website, you've agreed to this consent stuff. There's so much legalese, the language, and then the extent to which they have to cover their asses is so ridiculous. And so the whole legal system needs to change in that respect, right?
Yeah, so it's too litigious, which is part of the reason that you'll have to have all of this detailed disclaiming language, disclaim everything under the sun. You could talk about things in your terms of service that you don't even do, but you have to put a disclaimer in there because just in case, right? The number of times that you have to do that is kind of amazing. But it would be good if there were sort of standardized chunks of terms of service, so people could go and say, okay, well, this is the user agreement type A that I've read before in its entirety, but I know what A is. And so, yeah, I've got that one with Facebook, Twitter, Google, whatever. I've got type B with my bank, and I've got the,
I agree.
so on.
Yeah, we need some standardized stuff, and the legal system's just. I mean, I remember reading a long time ago a book called Liability by Peter Huber, I think, which I thought was a brilliant book, except for his solutions, which I thought were lame, but his analysis of the problem of liability law liability law is completely and utterly screwed up, right? Because it's not liability anymore. Basically, it's deep pockets and all. And that reflects on a lot of our legal system. And that's why I'm a little concerned about using common law, because I'm less confident in its ability these days, right? In normal times, I'd agree with you completely. But today, the legal system is so messed up, as I see it, and so non-objective in so many of its commercial rulings. For example, there's no such thing as commercial free speech. So I've talked about this on the show many times. That, I don't know if you've heard this, Amy, but recently, about 3 months ago, we got a new 500-page document from the SEC, basically dictating our marketing for a hedge fund, right? So what I can and cannot say, who I can and cannot market to, who I can talk to so for example, I can't say anything about my hedge fund on this show. I can't broadcast anything about it to the general public. That's illegal. But 500 pages. Now, there's no way I'm going to read 500 pages. They know that. It's purposefully ambiguous, and of course, there is no free speech in commercial speech. There's no businesses that is not required. The Supreme Court has ruled commercial speech is not protected speech.
Right. So
we have a lot of problems in this country. A lot of them. All right, let's see if we have questions that are related to Jonathan Honing reminds everybody that both Amy and I are both contributors, valued contributors to a new textbook on Americanism, a book you should all get, mainly because it's got an essay by Ayn Rand that you probably haven't read before. So, but yes, Amy and I both have essays in that. Big tech following consensus, albeit blindly, is different from making them being the lackeys of government, since that opens door. Absolutely, there's a huge difference between them following consensus. I probably think they are more following consensus than being the lackeys of government than Amy. Amy seems to think they're much more lackeys of government than I do. I think we both agree it's some or both. It's just a question of degree, right?
Yes, and I mean, and that's the thing. So where do you then draw the line? We are in this horrible mixed economy. We have the tech companies being threatened with being broken up, having their Section 230 immunity withdrawn. There's something new every day, practically.
Five bills in Congress right now to break up big tech. 5.
Yes.
Congress.
Yeah. And that is just one of the things. Do our bidding. Make sure you do something about misinformation, about this, about that.
No matter what they do, they're going to come under attack. All of that.
Government has too much power. Yes. Yeah.
All of that is scary and horrible, and government has too much power, and we should go after.
And one of the ways out of our current mess is to push for maximum amount of freedom of expression so that the right ideas can take hold.
Yes, but given the government has this power, we're all going to suffer from the fact that there's no out. There's no out. Other than to speak about it. And yes, to the extent that their platforms allow us to speak, that's a good thing. And luckily, YouTube still allows us to do this. So we're doing it. But we need to speak up about this government control. And my fear is that the more we attack big tech, even when there's some legitimacy to it, the more we embolden governments to control it, right? I mean, Ted Cruz flipped on this issue, and he did at some point because he was better. Mm-hmm. He used to be better. He flipped on this issue because he was getting pressure from people, from his constituency. I don't think I've come to the conclusion, sadly, that he doesn't believe in anything except power. Right? He used to think he believed in something, but he believes in power. And he as soon as he realized that kind of the Trump was the power base, and that's where the power was, and that's what he needed to appeal to. He completely changed, and so yes, we need to have as much expression as we can. We need to talk. We need to advocate against the government stepping in here, and I think the focus needs to be the government, because again, my fear is if we focus on tech, that emboldens them. It emboldens government.
No, and so when I focus on them, I focus on, again, always talking about this relationship, this dangerous relationship between government and tech as the problem. Yeah. And second, that people should choose alternatives of platforms that normatively encourage people to think for themselves, that don't see it, as their job to curate your feed and tell you what you should be able to read and see and everything else.
And we talked about this years ago, because this is basically the issue behind Snowden, right? This is the issue of the NSA having deals with Google and others to have backdoor channels, to curate your emails, to have, what is it, metadata? Remember the metadata?
Oh yeah, no, and that, yeah, and my view on that, right? So you can try to say, oh, there's communications and then there's metadata, but all of it is being shared pursuant to a perfectly legal contract between you and a business.
Yep.
And the government does not have any right to that without a search warrant. I don't care what kind of data you call it, unless they produce a warrant. And ideally, they need to produce a warrant to the subject of investigation. Remember the old days when they actually used to have to present a warrant to the subject of investigation? Now they just go to the quote third party. And they don't even have to present a warrant, right?
We agree, and it's not even a warrant. I think they need a proper warrant. You can't use these secret courts. A free country does not have secret courts, FISA courts. That is absurd and ridiculous. And it's, again, a tragedy that nobody talks about these issues anymore. You notice that? Even Rand Paul barely ever talks about it. These issues.
Rand Paul's been preoccupied with all the lockdowns and the mask theater and everything else. He's done some very good things with respect to, the mask theater.
Yeah, I'm skeptical about Rand Paul and these things too. But this stuff has been silenced. This stuff has gone away. Nobody talks about the NSA anymore. Nobody talks about, and they keep renewing the Patriot Act and they keep renewing FISA courts.
I mean, they love that we're all on Zoom, that we're all on this third-party communication software for almost all of our communications these days. No. And I think that they know, because of Carpenter, remember the Carpenter opinion versus United States, that they, kind of the clock is ticking. So if 127 days of cell phone location data is something for which they need to get a warrant, how are you supposed to, in principle, draw a distinction between that and other sorts of metadata that's shared with a third party? You're not, right? There is no principle distinction to be drawn. I think they know that the Carpenter ruling is going to be extended to a lot more. And right now, this is their opportunity to get their claws into everything, have that precedent established so that any extension of Carpenter is powerless to help us.
No, government is growing in power and they have power over us. And the more electronic we become, the more they can access our information. It's just, whether they get permission or not, there's no doubt in my mind that the NSA is all over this. It's even though they put in all kinds of so-called protections, I don't believe them, and the protections disappear as soon as the ideology of the protectors is at stake. All right, let's see, who are the creators of Parler and who are their intellectual influences? Do you have a free market orientation?
Yes, we definitely have a free market orientation. Multiple times the principals at Parler now, we've got George Farmer is our new CEO. He's the husband of Candace Owens. And we are referring to ourselves as little L libertarian. That's where we are. And so, seriously, people of all stripes of thought are welcome at Parler. We're left, right, center, libertarian. Everybody can come on based on viewpoint. Your content will not be treated differently on Parler.
Okay, let's see. I think none of these are directly related, so let's just take them from the top. What do you think of a recent online petition to deny Jeff Bezos re-entry after a space trip next month? Is it legally enforceable? Where people get this stuff up. Of course, it's not legally enforceable. And I think it's a disgrace, just like I thought the guillotine in front of his house was a disgrace.
I mean, you know, there's this great article that I used to teach in philosophy of law, and it's called The Spalentian Explorers, the article, I believe it was Lon Fuller. And one of the fictitious opinions, this has to do with these cave explorers, and it's one of these horrible disaster cases where they ended up having to eat each other in order to survive, and it was horrible, right? But one of the things that it talks about in a pretty helpful way to me is the fact that the premise of law is that you can have peaceful coexistence of human beings. You're going to say that you're going to use law to enforce something that makes actual living for Jeff Bezos impossible. Yeah, no. So
Right.
as much as I'm not happy with Jeff Bezos and what Amazon has done to us in January, even I would say no about that.
Yeah. As you know, I'm a huge Jeff Bezos fan. But
I was. Do you remember I was on Tucker defending Jeff Bezos? That did not age well.
I'm still a huge Jeff Bezos fan. You know, this is why we have courts. If companies do bad things, sue the hell out of them. And companies do bad things. Companies.
How about that Twitter contract between Twitter and Amazon in December? Anyway, go on.
All right. Hi, Amy. Just tuned in. Look forward to watching from beginning. Why did so many people go along with the lockdowns?
I mean, I think some people were actually concerned about the disease. A lot of people also do feel genuine concern for your fellow man, and you want to help the hospital capacity not get overrun. I mean, we got to see other countries have difficulty with it before we did, so we saw what could happen potentially if the wrong things were happening. But a lot of it was just we didn't know the truth, and I do think that the people were not permitted enough to talk about different views as to the effectiveness of lockdowns. I mean, as it stands right now, do people really openly compare what happened with California versus Florida, for example, to take the two extremes within the United States?
Discussed everywhere. It's being discussed everywhere. Sweden versus other countries. And I mean, there's a sense in which those comparisons are legit, there's a sense in which they're not. So I think people accepted the lockdowns because we've reached a point in this country, sadly in the Western world, where we follow orders, where we're told to do something, we do it. And fear is an immense, politicians have always known this. Certainly smart politicians know this. Donald Trump knew this. What's his name in New York knows this. They know how to use fear to mobilize people. And why do people suddenly want to build a wall? Because you make them afraid of the people coming over the wall. Why do suddenly people want to be locked down? Because you make them so terrified of the potential of what's going to happen, and you emphasize that. But and politicians panicked, and we panicked with them. Most people just don't think for themselves. That's the sad reality we live in. But yeah, I've seen comparisons like that all along. Throughout, you saw stories everywhere on Sweden that didn't lock down. The fact is they had more deaths than any of their neighbors. So the problem, and so they screwed up in other realms. They didn't lock down, but they didn't do testing and tracing and isolating. Nobody did testing, and isolating except Taiwan and Korea and a few other places. Nobody behaved well in this pandemic. And I think the other thing is we've become accustomed to central planners. We become accustomed to doing what the government tells us. And we're all China now. I've done a few shows on this. China is our model for everything. They have tariffs, so we have tariffs. They do lockdowns, so we do lockdowns. They want social scores, right? On people. We're going to have social scores on people. The West is basically enamored with the Chinese model, the right and the left. That's the amazing thing, because the right likes the authoritarian nature of the Chinese. The left right likes the authoritarian nature of the Chinese. So it's very scary because.
And it's funny. What is the thing that everybody's worried about? Russian misinformation.
Yeah.
And I think there should be more investigation into the propaganda and misinformation campaigns coming out of China.
I think that's right. But at the end of the day, I don't think the problem is misinformation. I don't think the problem is lack of information or misinformation or any of that. I think the problem is people not thinking for themselves. That's right. The challenge. And because as I said before, there's literally more information available today than at any time in human history. If you want to discover the truth, it's available to you out there. People choose not to.
Yeah. And so this is something that we are trying and we are going to cultivate on Parler, is the importance of thinking for yourself. I don't know if you've ever read this book. It's wonderful. And I'm going through it very slowly because I'm very busy. But it's Edith Hamilton, The Greek Way. Have you read this book?
I did years ago. I used to have it in California. Who knows if I still have it? But she did a whole series about Greece, and it's a wonderful book.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, was Greece and Athens perfect? No, not any more than the founding fathers. Of course, Socrates was forced to drink the hemlock. But let me read for you. I'm trying to get it up. I have this quotation from Edith Hamilton this morning. If you go to I'm just Amy Peikoff on Parler. You guys can follow me over there. And this is funny. I'm trying to get it to come up and I can't get it to come up. The first post that I've got on Parler is a great post. Come and check it out. No, but I've been, talking there, just quoting from Edith Hamilton about the Greeks and their joy for life, their, thinking for yourself above all. That, Socrates, as one of the best teachers ever, himself emphasized that he would not do his thinking, do anybody else's thinking for them. And this is, again, the what I want to try to go with Parler going forward, because we all know 2020 was a terrible year, not only because of the pandemic lockdowns, but maybe also because of the lockdowns. The election cycle was so contentious, and again, people driven by fear and by anger. And to get out of that and to try to focus more on the positive, what is the prize that we're going after when we're encouraging people to think for themselves? Is it so that they can, use whatever their arguments are to stir up fear in people? Is it to stir up, get angry, take my side against the other guy and everything else? No, it's all about trying to figure out how to live your life in the best way possible. And this is something you've been doing lately with your Rules for Life, which I have not seen the Rules for Life series yet. I want to, because I know that you've got Rules for Life that I will like better than Jordan Peterson's Rules for Life, right?
Probably. I'm pretty sure that's the case. Yes.
But yeah, this is where I want to turn everybody's focus in the future is think for yourself. Why? Because it's about values. It is about making your life the very best that it can be. So insofar as you could create Athens on the internet, that is the image that I'm putting in my mind when we talk about Parler. We had to rebuild the whole stack. So independent, we are not dependent on an Amazon or any of these big cloud services anymore. You can't be these days if you really want to allow this freedom.
To some extent, I'm surprised they didn't know that already, given the experience of.
Well, okay, so you could say that they should have had redundancy in our stack, right? Well,
given what happened to other platforms, it wasn't. Parler wasn't the first ones. Yeah. All right, let's go through these. You did remind me the Edith Hamilton quote that you didn't find, but you give us the spirit of.
I'm going to try to find it.
No, that's fine. You reminded me of the wonderful lecture Leonard gave on the Greek cruise. You remember that?
Yes.
On why Greek was his favorite culture. That's Leonard Peikoff.
Why Greece is my favorite civilization.
Yes, and that was a fantastic talk. You can find it on the Ayn Rand on YouTube. I think it's on YouTube. If not, it's definitely on the Ayn Rand bookstore. But it's a terrific talk on why Greece was his favorite civilization. All right, let's see. In 2018, Facebook said it was going after dangerous health misinformation, like bleach curing autism. That's scary. Is there any evidence big tech was doing the government's bidding with its links to reliable COVID information?
I mean, I'm wondering.
I don't think there is any proof of that. There's suspicion, but I don't think there's any proof.
I'm wondering if you could even subject them to discovery given Section 230. So good luck finding it.
I don't know. I don't know. Somebody should try that, because I wonder. I wonder if that's. I wonder.
All I know is what I see in these haranguings again, which is politicians implicitly threatening them with either breaking them up or amending Section 230 in various ways, or maybe even repealing Section 230 if they don't do their bidding. And yeah, Republicans are guilty of this too, right? So Republicans will say basically, unless you have all voices equal, whatever that's supposed to mean, then somehow we're going to repeal Section 230. None of them should be able to use Section 230 as a weapon that way. We should be able to objectively look and say, is this immunity being applied properly, or is it too broad? Should it be more narrow the way Thomas is arguing, or not? And figure it out in principle, not by politicians and poll.
So I'm not sure that's impossible, but I don't know. So
it's not impossible, but it doesn't seem to be happening right now is the problem.
Yeah, but the question is there a basis for a lawsuit, and is anybody suing them? I mean, it would be interesting to use discovery to see if there are links between them and government. I mean, it
would be wonderful.
I suspect the answer is no. I suspect that they're influenced by the threats. There's no question they're influenced by the threats, as would any human being be influenced by the fact that they're being threatened.
Yes.
But again, then clearly the blame needs to be at the threatener. But let's take this $50 question by Michael. Amy, now that your career is social media, is your career social media? I guess it is. Would you, as an objectivist and the philosophical political perspective that comes from that, have any chance of working at your capacity and level within any of the major platforms? So could you have this job at a major platform, do you think?
Right now, I don't think so, because I think that it's dominated by people who think that this policy is not the way to go. It's certainly not consistent with their monetization model.
So I was on a private call. I don't know how you found out about this call that I was on.
Because I forget how I found out, but I found out in a weird way, but whatever. Go ahead.
It's weird because it was a private call, and it's
I think I didn't find out all about it, but I found out something, and then you thought I knew more than I did. I think that's what happened.
So I was on a call with two people who have a similar job to Amy's at two, not Facebook or Twitter, but two significant platforms out there. I won't say the names because it was a private conversation. And I have to admit, no, they're not objectivists. They're clearly not objectivists. And they probably, one of them, I would say, was lent right, and one of them was leaning left. I found them to be thoughtful, confused, but thoughtful, and emphasize the difficulty of the situation they were in terms of the decisions they had to make. Mm-hmm. And the whole process is not a simple process, particularly if you are, I think for Parler, in a sense, neutrality. I mean, it's hard enough being neutral, right? It's hard enough but they want to have some curation, but they have no idea what standards to use. They really struggle with this. So I don't think so I have a more benevolent view of them. I don't think they're malicious. I don't think they're completely sucking up to politicians. I think they're obviously influenced by all these things. I think they're trying to figure it out, and they don't know how. And they're trying to prevent people from taking, Clorox for autism or whatever. And then they're trying to apply those principles to COVID, and they don't know how. So they're using CDC guidelines, which unfortunately is what we have. And it's politicized. We know the CDC is a political organization. It's politicized, just mm-hmm. like the food pyramid is politicized. And just like in schools, they teach the food pyramid, even though that's politicized. Let me tell you about the dairy lobby and how it lobbies for a particular position in the food pyramid. It does, and so does the beef lobby, and so does the wheat lobby, and so does all these lobbies. So Amy and I share somewhat of a similar diet, or have in the past. I don't know what diet she's on now. And we don't buy into the food pyramid. And yet that's what everybody's eating because that's what government told them to eat. It's the same kind of thing. So I see the same trend in society that is not thinking, accepting government authority and accepting government word. And I don't think social media is different in that sense. I think they do the same thing. But yeah, I don't think Amy could survive in a Facebook or somewhere like that. They wouldn't let her because they have a particular point of view. And
it was funny because when I did write the brief in US versus Facebook, someone was saying, oh, Facebook should give you a job. And I don't think they understood. I mean, especially given the response that Facebook's attorneys wrote to what I had pointed out. I mean, they were basically saying, oh, no, there's no issue here. The government's standards are fine in this case and will protect the users. And that's just not the case.
Yeah, but that's also the standard legal perspective. That's not sucking up to government. That's everybody thinks that. I mean, how many people agree with you in third-party doctrine? Like a handful. So again, you have to separate out what is the government is forcing them to do and what's just standard for everybody to do. Everybody does this.
More and more people are starting to agree. There are states that have actually outlawed the third-party doctrine and others that are trying to do so. So yes, it's cool. Getting there. Yeah, it's going to happen.
All right. Let's see. Relevant ones. Hi, Amy. Oh, here's completely relevant. Do you think the third-party doctrine has created the dilemma for big tech, resulting in a pretzel-style UI and for SM platforms?
Pretzel style UI for social media platforms because of the third party doctrine.
Yeah, I don't see.
No, I don't see the relation. So, again, the third party doctrine just says when you share information with that third party, social media company being one of them, that the government can obtain the information without a warrant because supposedly once you've shared it, you don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy. I don't see how that relates to the particular user interface. There's the other complicating factor is the monetization model of some of these platforms, which is heavily information dependent. So they'll collect all kinds of data about you, not because they want to be the arm of government for, at least at the beginning, and they don't want to at all. Who knows what happens now? It's maybe in their interest to help government out in certain ways. It's been twisted. But at the beginning, they just want to make money, there's no problem with wanting to make money. And in fact, there's been a number of times that an ad shown to me by a social media platform has been valuable to me because they have some information. So, in a perfect world, and, perfect used in our sense, right? In a perfect world, this wouldn't be bad necessarily. This would be based on your individual preference in terms of privacy and how much you wanted other people to know about you. But in today's world, unfortunately, it has to do with government getting its hands on the data. Yeah.
All right. Other $20 questions, unrelated. If you constantly see yourself as a victim, that seemed to be the way to psychologically justify any level of destruction you unleash against the world. Yeah, I think that's kind of Tui's mentality, right? Of viewing himself as a victim, hating the world for being a victim, and then unleashing destruction. It's what drives nihilism to a large extent.
Yeah, I think, so, some people are definitely invested in seeing themselves that way, right? There are cases in which people are victims, but then the question is the extent to which you, do what Rand said, right? Never think of pain or danger or enemies a moment longer than is necessary to fight them. And certainly not.
Unfortunately, people obsess about them and they don't, we live in a world obsessed with.
There's a certain amount of time that you think about it so that it never happens again. And then you go on, right?
Yeah. Curious if you've seen the recent commercial for Vans sneakers. Could be right out of Atlas. A rapper says to all young creatives, nothing makes sense and no one knows what they're doing. If something feels weird and different, go with it. Yeah, something out of Atlas is one of the villains saying, yes. I think that's what he meant. Yeah, it's complete subjectivism, but that's exactly where we are in the culture. You know, complete subjectivism. Go with whatever feels weird and different. I think Austin, Texas' slogan is stay weird.
Yeah, keep Austin,
Keep Austin weird.
You know, I saw the other day on the highway what I thought was the most perverted use of the, the catchphrase, don't mess with Texas.
Oh, I love that. I used to love that phrase. Yeah.
Okay. So now on the freeway, don't mess with Texas is used on a sign that announces, I believe, I was going by fast, but the fine for littering is up to $2,000. So don't mess with Texas.
That used to be on the littering sign 28 years ago when I lived in Texas.
Okay, so it was already bad then. Just don't mess with Texas used to mean that we're for rugged individualism in effect, yes. Right? That
yes. that Texas means don't mess with the state of Texas. Yes, that's very different. Yeah. With the state authority, don't mess with it. Yeah, but I saw that sign back when I was in Austin. It used to bug the hell out of me because I love the term, don't mess with us. But unfortunately, like everything else, the statists can't keep their hands off of something good. Let's see. What do you think of a recent online we did that. The lockdowns really screwed over supply chains. Not sure how the lockdowns help long-term health of business and capital allocation. I mean, they definitely helped some business. If you're in Zoom, you did enormously. Now, you invested a lot during the crisis. You remember Zoom struggled in the beginning, and they had to pour massive amounts of resources. If you're Robinhood, you did well during the crisis. If you're Netflix, you did well during the crisis. So the online world generally did very well during the crisis. But in terms of allocation of capital, it's a disaster. And in terms of long-term health of business, it's a disaster because it taught people all the wrong lessons.
The one good thing that I see that came out of it is that people did see that you could work remotely. Many people can work remotely. And so it would open up a lot more of geographical diversity choices for people to, perform effectively in their jobs while living wherever they wanted. But at what cost did we learn that lesson? We could have learned it in much better ways.
We would have learned it much slower. It's like wars sometimes improve certain aspects of production or certain,
right.
Like World War II, we learned that women could work in manufacturing, all right, but at what cost, right? So yes, there's a lot of a lot of things like that happen that you could say are benefits of wars, but they're not really benefit of a war. There's no benefit to a war. The net is destructive.
Right.
Somebody asked, when is your talk in Israel going to be? I'm going to be in Israel. I think my talks will be around August 2 to 6, something like that. So whatever the Sunday is, the first Sunday in August, and for 4 days, if I can, they'll let me in, right? I assume they will. Right now they will, but who knows, right? What?
You're fully vaccinated, right?
I'm fully vaccinated. The state of Israel is fully vaccinated. Yeah, I mean, logic would suggest I could travel anywhere in the world, but I still can't go to the UK. They still won't let me in the UK.
Europe welcomes you.
France and Spain will welcome me. Germany doesn't. So it depends on the country. Different countries have different. The European Union generally is pro encouraging American tourists, but every country has its own regulation, has its own standards. So so far, I'm not allowed to go into the UK, but I can go into France or Spain.
Are you able to shop in a grocery store without a mask?
It depends on what the grocery store wants. In Puerto Rico, it depends on the business. The business determines.
Okay.
I think that's right, because they just changed the rules. You could, up until recently, you could be outside without a mask, but you had to be indoors with a mask. But I think they changed that to, it's now, so like my office building where I have an office, they still require masks, but it's a private business. They can do what they want.
Sure.
And I think most people are still wearing masks in businesses. I don't get it. but they are. You'd think they'd get the benefit of vaccines, but people. I saw this in the beginning of the COVID on both sides of the argument. People don't know how to think statistically. They don't know how to look at statistics. They don't know how to look at scientific studies. They don't understand any of this. And so they don't get when it's bad, they don't get it. When it's good, they don't get it. They just have no clue. They're completely blind. And so they're completely dependent on the CDC or on the authority they choose. Some of them, their authority is conspiracy theories, right? I know people who won't get vaccinated because of all the conspiracy theories about vaccination. It's just amazing. So for example, right now there's this scare about the Pfizer vaccine and certain people having young people who get the Pfizer vaccine get
myocardia.
Myocardia. So
inflammation.
Two things about that. Young people shouldn't get vaccinated. I mean, it's absurd that young people are getting vaccinated.
Cost benefit is
they should
not
have
there.
never gotten vaccinated. No young person. The fact that it's free is partially distorting this. The fact that the government is pushing it. But if you're under the age of 30 and you're healthy, you should not get vaccinated. There's no upside. COVID poses basically close to zero risk to you. The cost benefit analysis is not there. So first, that is absurd. But then second, if you look at the number of people who've gotten this heart disease,
it's quite small,
it's minute, it's insignificant. So again,
but still, if you are an individual under 30, relatively healthy, metabolically healthy, then you should not be getting the vaccine.
Yeah, but not because of
not
the risk.
now anyway.
Not because of the risk, but because it's a waste. Because it's useless. It doesn't do anything to you. And I guess there is some risk, but there's some risk of COVID too. So the risk of COVID to somebody under 30 is probably a little higher than the risk of this heart thing for somebody under 30, but they're both so negligible.
Maybe it depends whether you're male, because it's maybe linked to testosterone or something. Yeah.
But it's all negligible. It's all within margin of error. It's all, you shouldn't be taking it. But, and I wouldn't have, in the normal circumstances, in the normal state of the world, I don't know that I would have taken the vaccine. I think, some people would have urged me to do it, my wife and so on, because I'm pretty confident that.
I think with your diet, you would have done.
My wife did great, really well. I mean, she had a bad flu, but she had a bad flu, right? I mean, she had COVID and she got through it. And I was with her the entire time. We didn't know she had COVID, so I didn't do any distancing measures at all. And I never got it. And I've been traveling the whole time and I've been doing all this stuff. So I'm pretty confident. But the point is, I got the vaccine primarily because I want to travel. And I knew that it would be a restriction. So, but yes, the whole discussion of vaccines, the whole discussion of risk, but the whole discussion on the other side of risk, that people who minimize the risk, right? We said, it's just like the common cold or whatever. And both sides were completely and utterly wrong. And there were so few voices that were actually objective. And it was horrifying to me how many people couldn't think about the issue, couldn't objectively think about it and look at numbers and actually analyze numbers objectively. But I guess
encouraging a culture of people thinking for themselves and modeling it as much as possible as well.
Absolutely. The challenge is, of course, that people, I don't know. People just don't seem to do it. Again, there was no lack of information, but I saw so many people who you'd think were thinkers for themselves jump on misinformation. It was just absurd on both sides.
Yeah.
If objectivism doesn't get at least some amount of academic credibility soon, I don't see how we're going to slow down the decline of the West in any significant way. I don't know if it's academic credibility we need. We need credibility, but I don't know if it's academic credibility. Today, intellectuals seem to have a huge amount of influence, even if they're not in academia. Yes. Academic credibility would give us a lot of space, a lot of benefits, but I don't think it's the necessary path today. But yeah, we're in trouble. The world is in trouble. There's no question.
Quality public intellectuals will do great work as well. Writing well-researched books on whatever area of expertise you have and getting out there is another option.
Absolutely. I mean, look at what Alex has done on the debate on climate change.
Exactly.
He hasn't have an impact yet. That's the sad part, but he has moved more people in his direction, just not enough yet. But it's
So he's had an impact, but it's sometimes these things are going to take a while. And if you're going, if you're going against the grain,
yeah, it's hard.
You have to expect it. Yeah.
Amy, what do you think of Candace Owens? Have you met her?
I have not met her. This is an interesting thing. So I started working for Parler when I had met only one person in person who was the strategic investor who'd read my brief.
Yeah.
I have not met, I haven't met Rebecca Mercer, who's the primary original investor. In fact, she conceived of Parler. Her son named Parler. I've spoken with her on the phone a number of times, and I really like her. I have not met her. I have not met George Farmer in person. I haven't met Candace Owens yet. From what I know of her, I like her, and I really like working with George. So no, but most of the people that I work with I have not met in person. I've met one of the people in my department who happens to be based in San Antonio when he's not traveling. And
Yep.
so, yeah, no, and I did meet the former CEO, Mark Meckler, in person, because he's in the Austin area, happens to be in the Austin area as well. But no, we are in a strange time, where, again, this is COVID and people work remotely anyway, but Parler, most people are working remotely. And so, no, I haven't met them in person, but yeah, I look forward to it. Again, when traveling is opened up, we are all going to get together, I think, at a certain point.
Yep. Well, travel, you could always travel, but a lot of people were not doing meetings, and travel was a hassle. Travel still is a hassle. You still have to wear a mask on an airplane.
I think this next year will be exciting. Imagine we get to meet in person again and have discussions, and not always online.
Well, I saw you in person a few months ago.
I did a couple of months ago, and I think I had only one shot at that point, so we're taking the big risk, right? I had only one Moderna shot at that point.
All right, two last questions, and we reached our $400 goal. Alejandrina did it. Good for you, Alejandrina. That's great. Thank you for all of you who supported the show today with the Super Chat questions. What does left or right even mean at this point? I've talked a lot about that. On a side note, well, we'll get to the side note. So do you have an opinion on left and right?
No, I think those labels are, relatively useless labels.
Individualism versus collectivism. That's the labels you have to look for, I think. So where's somebody on the spectrum? Because there's a spectrum from individualism to collectivism. And I think, unfortunately, most people who self-identify as left and right are on the collectivist side. On a side note, for objectivism to catch on, you need a young, good-looking man or woman with a sexy accent, preferably posh British accent. That's terrible.
So are we talking about George Farmer, our CEO? Is that what we're talking about?
Too young.
He's not an objectivist, by the way.
So young, good-looking people right here on the show right now. And, this
young, depending on who you speak to.
Yeah,
yes,
I know.
Sure.
This is the comment we get. That's an insult, certainly to Amy. Not really. People, you got to develop that British accent, Amy. That's what's missing from your repertoire.
I could bring someone in who's got a nice accent.
There you go. CRT says whites only allowed civil rights because it benefited them. And this is selfish, and civil rights movement is tainted. But doesn't freedom for all benefit all? Is their argument altruism at work?
I got a little bit confused there, but then I started thinking of the New Zealand chapter of the Greta Thunberg, whatever it was, that canceled itself because it was too racist.
Yeah, did you read the article why they're too racist? Because the primary victims. So this is altruism. This is this is victim worship. Victim worship. The primary victims of climate change are indigenous peoples and people of color. Therefore, any movement against climate change must be led by people of color and indigenous people. Therefore, white New Zealanders should be okay for them to follow if the movement is led. But since this movement was led by whites, indeed, Greta is white, not only white, she's blonde and blue-eyed, I think. Therefore, the whole project is tainted until the indigenous people lead the movement. That is sick. That is true sickness.
Okay, so I
And
do you want to reread that question because we lost the plot?
CRT says whites only. So let me do the grammar right. CRT says whites only allowed civil rights because it benefited them. So it's selfish towards whites.
Okay.
And this is selfish. And civil rights movement is therefore tainted. But doesn't freedom for all benefit all?
Certainly.
Yeah. So
okay, I think what's in there is the idea that you can benefit from something that you get against someone else's will, right? I mean, but there are no conflicts of interest among rational men, right? The only reason that you wouldn't think that freedom for all benefits all is because you think that you get a benefit when somebody else is forced to provide you the benefit.
yeah, it's a zero-sum world kind of mentality
Yes,
of
yes.
exploitation, and that's what CRT has. But it's also
desire for the unearned, I mean,
but it's not that they are attacking the idea of freedom for all benefits all. It's they are saying, for example, oh, whites supported civil rights because they wanted blacks to consume more goods, right? So it would make them more money. So they view it in terms of material benefits. And that's just sick. And it's, again, racist. It's attributing motives to whites that if you flipped it, if you attributed those kind of motives to blacks, you'd be called a racist, and they should be called a racist for attributing these motives to white people.
It's very Kantian, right? It's very Kantian in the sense that Kant would say in order for an action to be good,
yes.
the motive of duty had to determine it. So
yes.
if you had any element of self-interest in there at all, that tainted your action. You could never tell objectively whether your action is good unless you were doing it entirely against your interests. So the fact that they're going to make some money because the blacks who are free are going to spend money on goods and therefore give them more business, if that's any part of their motive at all, then the whole thing is just corrupt and horrible. You can't say that it's good. Yeah, the best you could say is that it's amoral.
Yep, absolutely. And then is the argument altruism to work? Absolutely. You just heard it from Amy, right? The altruism of you've got to just think of others. You've got to follow duty, and duty.
That's the only way you can be sure that your action is good is if you're doing it against your own interest.
You have to be completely selfless. It's again, I've always said that the point of altruism is not to help other people. It's for you not to help yourself. It's to be selfless. What you do with other people is secondary. It's you not helping yourself is the prime motive. That's what makes it so sick. All right. It's fun.
Thank you. It got dark here since
getting back together. That's right. You need better lighting.
I need some lighting. I was in natural light. It was great 2 hours ago.
I found these great lights for my studio.
Send me a link, and I would like to know. Yeah,
I got them at Best Buy. I'll send you a link. They're
some people keep me on for 2 hours, and so
Elgato. They're Elgato lights, and I've got 2 of them, and you control them from the computer. So you turn them on and off on the computer. They're Wi-Fi lights, and I love technology. They're so cool. All right.
I love it too, but it's a tool like anything else, good or bad.
Yes, it is. I use it for good.
Okay, so yeah, everybody zoom over to Parler soon. We are frantically improving our new code base. So do come check us out at parler.com.
Sounds good. All right, everybody. Thanks for being on the show. Don't forget to like the show before you leave. Don't forget to support the show at youronbrookshow.com/support. Don't forget to Patreon, subscribe to the show if you're not a subscriber. Click the bell, go to Parler, check it out, do all the stuff that we want you to do.
I will be in touch with you about Parler. You're on very soon as well. Okay?
Well, you have to. I think I'm on Parler. I used to be on.
You were on, but you're not active right now. I will.
I've never been active. I've been on and never been active. Maybe now you.
Outreach people will speak to you. Okay.
And you can convince me to be active. Another platform for me to think about. They need to convince me to find a way to delegate this to somebody else.
we will
I delegate as
figure
much
out a
as
way.
my social media to other people as I can. I hate, as much as I defend them, I hate Facebook and Twitter and all these things. They drive me nuts. Who has time? Anyway, thanks for being on the show. It's good
Thanks
to
for
have you
having
back.
me.
It's been a long time.
See you soon.
Yes, we'll see you soon. We'll see you in Austin, and you guys should all come to Austin. See Amy and me at Ocon. Oh wait,
Barbecue.
Austin barbecue, absolutely. Bye,
Okay.
Amy.
Take care.